This video is on slope and rate of change. We've already seen a video of Mr. Slopeman that talks about the 4 different types of slope that we can have. Now to look at our booklet that talks about the different things we can do with slope. So we have formulas, we can find the slope from 2 coordinates, we can find the slope and rate of change from a table, from a graph, and then in real world context. So first we want to look at the formulas to be able to find slope. We've seen a couple when we know that we have an undefined slope or a zero slope. But how do we get those numbers? So the first formula is using when we have coordinates. It's we take our y2 coordinate and subtract our y1 coordinate. Then we divide that by our x2 coordinate minus our x1 coordinate. Now another way of saying that is, if we're using mathematical terms, it's called delta y divided by delta x. This is a Greek letter. This is a triangle. It's a Greek letter called delta. What that delta means is really change in y. And then we divide that by our change in x. So our formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which in simpler version of that, or mathematical version, is delta y over delta x. Again, delta just means change in. So we have change in y over change in x. This is if you're given coordinates. Now you can also look at it from a graph, which is the change in y is the up and down. So that's a rising over the change in x, which is horizontally, that's a run. So we can say for a graph, it's rise over run, which again, the rise is that vertical change and the run is the horizontal change. We also need to remember the difference between positive slope and negative slope and how that comes about. As we've talked about in a previous video, undefined slope is when 0 is in the denominator and zero slope is when 0 is in the numerator. So a positive slope, when we have our fractions, after we've subtracted our numbers, it's when you have a positive number divided by another positive number, or when you have a negative number divided by a negative number, which is how we got up and right, because up is positive, right is positive, or we can have down and left, because down is negative and left is negative. And then a negative divided by negative is a positive. To get a negative slope, we could go up and left, which is up is a rise of a positive, and left is a run of a negative. So a positive divided by negative is a negative. Or we could go down and right. So down is a rise of a negative, and right is a run of a positive. And a negative divided by positive is a negative. So these are the formulas to be able to find slope. Now we're going to do a couple of examples just to find the slope using 2 coordinates. So from 2 coordinates, we're going to find the slope using these formulas. So I'm going to fold this up. So our first example is to find the slope between -4, 3 and 2, 6. So what we want to do is determine what our x1 and our y1 is, and our x2 and our y2. So my first coordinate is going to be my 1's, and my second coordinate is going to be my 2's. So my -4 is x1, and my 2 is my x2. Then my y's, so 3 is going to be my y1 because it's in that first coordinate, and then my 6 is going to be my y2 because it's in my second coordinate. Notice that the 1's, the x and the y, both have a 1 on it, and this x and y both have 2 on it because they're in the same coordinate. So then what we want to do is subtract, finding our change in y's and change in x. So remember, it's change in y over change in x. So our formula is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Change in y over change in x. So it's the difference of the y values over the difference of the x values. So now plugging them in, my y2 value is 6 minus my y1 value is 3, because no matter what, I have to put that minus sign. Even if there is a negative, I still have to put that minus sign. Divided by my x2 value is 2 minus my x1 value is negative 4. So I'm going to put negative 4 here. Now, when we see we have a negative and a minus and a negative, I'm going to put parentheses around that negative 4 because I have to have that minus sign in there no matter what. So what really happens when we minus a negative, that really turns into plus. So this turns into plus. So now we have, on the numerator, 6 minus 3 is 3, divided by, we now have 2 plus 4, because that turns into plus. 2 minus a negative 4 becomes 2 plus 4. 2 plus 4 is 6. And now all we have to do is simplify this. So 3 divided by 6 is 1 divided by 2, so 1/2. Our slope is 1/2. Now the thing is that you can switch the order you subtract, but if y1 is first on top, then x1 must be first on the bottom. I like to say, just stay consistent. So if you just want to say y minus y over x minus x, that's also fine. You just have to make sure that whatever coordinate you start with on the top, you have to use the same coordinate first on the bottom. So if I were to switch these, I would then say, instead of my 6 being first, I would say 3. I'm going to use y1 first. 3 minus, then my y2 is 6. Divided by, so if I use the y1 in the first on the numerator, I have to use x1 first in the denominator. So I'm going to use negative 4 first. Negative 4 minus, and then I go to my x2, which is 2. So I still have y minus y over x minus x. And I end up with the same numbers. So I have 3 minus 6 is negative 3 divided by, now I have negative 4 minus 2. So I actually have both negative, so this doesn't turn into a positive, but negative 4 minus 2 becomes negative 6. Now if I want to simplify this, a negative divided by a negative becomes a positive. So I know it's going to be positive. And then 3 divided by 6 is 1 divided by 2. I end up with the same slope because I was consistent with putting from my first coordinate and my first coordinate. So I have my y1 and my x1 first. On the first way I did it, I had my y2 and my x2 first, regardless of, as long as I kept the same coordinate together, top and bottom, or I kept the x2 and the y2 together, top and bottom. I just have to stay consistent. You cannot switch to put x's on the top. So no matter what, it's never x's on the top. It's always y's on the top. Y values must always be on the top in the numerator. Must always happen. That is how you find the slope from two coordinates.